I'm super excited to be here chatting with everybody and like talking through my experiences. If that picture was not big enough, I have another one here that's even bigger. For my introduction, apart from being a product designer, I'd also like to add a couple of other things, which is my soft skills. I love singing songs in languages I don't know, and I also love attempting handstands. I'm really bad at both of those things. But the one thing that I can confidently say that I'm good at is product design. And I absolutely love working in this field and learning from everybody. And also, I'm very excited to be here to be able to share my experiences. So, today we're really looking at how do we bridge the gap to build better products faster, right? So, one of the big things that I've had to face is about like how I don't know something, but I'm working within a product team that's moving really fast. And there's all these technical things that I need to onboard to very quickly. And one of the ways I would say that you identify that you're in this situation is when everyone around you sounds like they're speaking English, but they're really not. And I can talk a little bit more about this. What I mean is that when people are talking around you and you understand all the words, but they don't really make sense unless you're part of that product team, then that's a very good indicator that you're in a space that's very, very technical. For example, there was a product that we worked on that was called T-Volt. And the way we described the product was that it was to simplify the process of secrets management. Now, I'm sure all of you know all of the words on this page, but what does it really mean? There was an explanation for it. They said T-Vault simplifies the access management of secrets by hiding all the integrity details. All the functionality available via the web UI is exposed via APIs, and documentation is available from within the UI. Again, we know all of the words, but none of this makes sense. Maybe it might make sense to the people who this is targeted towards. But most likely, this definition only serves the product team that's working on it and building it, which what happens is it perpetuates this ambiguity around the product, which goes down all the way to the user, which is something we want to break down. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Here are some of the ways that I've helped break that down. So the first thing I do is try to break down the buzzwords, right? And this would include things like secrets. What do they actually mean? They're talking, when they say secrets, they mean credentials, and they mean this is a service that manages credentials. But what does credentials also mean in this context? They were talking about certificates and API keys and things like that. But asking those questions basically triggered a line of questions which helped us understand the product a lot more. So sometimes you might feel like, oh, this seems like a very basic question. I can't go to the product owner and ask him, hey, what does that mean? Like, what does the secret manager mean? That is the most basic definition of the project. But I think what it does is it helps really like get alignment for everybody in the room. And it also helps clarify things and solidifies your understanding of what you're working on. Another example that was used in this project was called CRUD, right? And CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. Now, this is an industry-wide term for developers, and so it was fairly universal, I would say. But I think as your organization becomes bigger, there tends to be acronyms and abbreviations that apply only within those companies, and that's when it gets trickier. And you would only have it if you have like historical product knowledge. So when you're coming in new, I think it's a great time for you to step in and just say, hey, I would like more clarity on it, and get that clarification. The second thing that I do is try to map it to the real world. For example, right, with Volt. Volt simplifies the process of secrets management. Cloud application developers use it to find basically credentials from that service to integrate it back into their code. But this is very hard to wrap your head around. And if I'm going to be designing it for people, I need to be able to understand it. And so how do developers really use it? They basically go into this website and they'll search for keys out here, and they'll click on it and they'll check if it's the right key, and then they'll copy it and put it back into their code. Now, this was taking a lot of effort because we noticed that there's a lot of issues with this. There's a lot of UI and UX issues within this, but data was also telling us that developers were finding it thrice as hard to find something. So if they were looking for a key, they had to look for it at least 2 or 3 times before they found the right key. And so one really easy way that I found to like map this logic back was using an example. Think messy drawer in your house, right? And you're trying to find a mailbox key. And you know when you're opening the drawer, there's so many keys in there that it's going to take you at least a few times before you find the right one. That's kind of what was happening with the developers. Reframing it to this type of an analogy really helped simplify it and like make it more consistent across all of the team to use it. So when we were talking about things and explaining even our solutions, it became way easier to kind of socialize our thinking. The third one is to build an I don't know doc. This is really building an FAQ for yourself. And this you can do when you have more time. But basically what I do is I maintain a document where I write down my understanding of like the big questions that I might have. And the reason why this was helpful for me was when I found new parts of the project that related back to the old project or was based on the logic of older projects, it helped me make the connection for between the two. And it also helped me like recognize when I was making mistakes. If I saw something that was documented earlier on and I realized, oh, my understanding of it was not right, I was able to go back and pinpoint where I was making a mistake and where the logic was breaking. The fourth one is to find a BFF. I would say if you're working on a super technical space and if you're in the tech industry, find a dev or find someone who's a technical person. Because once they're your friend, you can ask them all of their silliest questions and you can keep asking them questions again and again. I've realized that this helps you really like build a relationship with them. And also over time, I think it also helps build trust. And it shows, I think, your technical partners that you're more invested in understanding how these systems work and building solutions for them rather than just thinking about it from an end experience point of view. The last one is channeling your inner Bob Ross. I think one of the things that's very unique that we bring to the table as designers is usually our visualization skills. And a lot of times I feel like we have this power to really bring alignment to the team with just one document. And so, for example, with the T-Vote, one of the things that we wanted to show was around the site architecture and how it was causing confusion for the users. We talked about the keys and we talked about like how it was very hard for them to find it because they're looking for the keys in one drawer, multiple drawers. So all the all the elements on the left, which are like they're color coded, so each of those belong to like the same units, right? So all the safes are all green, the service accounts are purple, but you can see they're in different places. And even the way this is organized really doesn't have a lot of structure to it, which helped like show just how much confusion was being caused just by this site architecture. And so our proposal was to like basically clean it up and make it very, very straightforward. This really helped cement our like how we thought about the product and what we were pitching were not just UI solutions, but really like experience solutions. So these are like the high level summary of all of the things that I covered so far. I'm happy to take any questions. But before that, I also have the after. This is basically how we redesigned it. And what we did was from the before, we changed everything to long form text because we realized that a lot of the users were looking at like the end notes to see which was the right key. And then we also like changed the layout to a panel on the left instead of having it all up top so that we can create more more space. And then we also prioritize the search.
Great. So is that it, or are you,
I can go back and.
No, I was just
Share
wondering if I
anything
should jump in.
specific in other spots.
Well, one question that I did have just going through it, and I thought some really, really good advice there about kind of there are those acronyms that you just know when you've been somewhere, but the first time you hear them, it's always kind of daunting. But at that same time, when you're first hearing them, that's when people most likely have what people call imposter syndrome. So you're trying as best you can to look as competent as you can. So, what advice do you give for people with how do you overcome that fear of saying, I don't know, when you're also battling your inner fear of being an imposter?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was very interesting for me to hear of late has been, like I think when I was younger in my career, um, I was really nervous about that too, right? Because you're trying very hard to seem like you know what's going on and to not come across as like you're very new to the field. And so that's kind of where it stems from. And I realized when I was talking to somebody like last month, um, just that there are so many things where like you might not know what the words mean, but you know your process and you know how to be a good designer, and the foundation is there. And you might not know something that's relevant to this project, but you definitely have the skill set to apply the base foundation to it. And I think like remembering that is very crucial. And it's definitely very unnerving to be in a room full of experts and to be the person that's asking all the silly basic questions. But oftentimes, I think it really helps bring about clarity, not just for you, but for other people in the room. Because most likely, if you don't know something, there is a high chance that someone else in the room also doesn't know it, but they're just kind of afraid to, again, ask those questions. So I think you should just own the moment and go for it and ask it. And you're going to be a better designer for it or a better product person for it.
Excellent. And just on that kind of did you call it a log or a diary? Your I don't know log. Um, did you ever? Because I've worked on a project where somebody came in and they took that initiative, and we thought this is fantastic. So we actually published that on a kind of a project wiki, so that other people who, whether it was a new person joining our team or other people who would just every so often interact with our teams, and they found it a hugely valuable kind of cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Have you ever done something like that?
Yeah, there's actually a picture of it from the doc, but I guess it didn't show up in my deck. And I'm not sure if you can see it right now on the screen. Is it still showing?
Yep, I'm showing it now.
Yeah. So this was basically the doc I built, but there's like other docs that I built by each project. And you're right. Ultimately, I think that's what we end up using it as cheat sheets when like people onboard to the project or like they're onboarding to the company. They've often found it very easy to read from someone else's point of view and not just like something that's written as a help article, because we have access to those, right? But I think it goes back to like just taking like a human approach to describing these things. And I think when we write it to break it down for ourselves, it often helps other people. And it also like I think there's a lot of value, and it's very powerful when you write something down because it forces you to think about the logic of things, and it forces you to capture those gaps that might be missing when your brain is just jumping like, at like 10 times the speed.
Yeah, no, it is fantastic. And if anybody out there is just joining a team, I'd highly recommend doing something like this and then publishing it for everybody else to see as well. But yeah, no, the product looks great because I know from my personal experience, key management is a nightmare. I absolutely hate it. And I often do the worst practice of checking my keys into my code, which is a very bad practice, but it's private repositories. I don't share them. But no, hopefully it is an area. I know AWS key management is a nightmare for me. So hopefully somebody can improve it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, key management is, that project was super fun to work on because it sounded so simple, but it was so complex, right? Until we like removed all the buzzwords from it and all the like acronyms from it. We were like, oh, this makes so much sense. This is like, sure, this I can solve as a problem. But like when we talk about like, getting keys and like copying those over and like creating new keys and like finding certificates and like, like all the privacy around it, like when it's shrouded in so much mystery, it just becomes like overwhelming to solve. So I think part of the effort was like breaking it down so it's just feels easy to solve.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great point that you brought up there, that I didn't touch on earlier. So this is probably quite a technical product, and there's a lot of kind of technical elements. And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to reference the recent LastPass troubles. Um, if you're not familiar, they're a kind of a password management service that got hacked recently, and all of the customer passwords, encrypted passwords, were leaked. So when you were kind of learning and designing about this, was that kind of back end zero knowledge kind of concept, was that being discussed about how much access the developers themselves had, and how did you tackle that as a designer?
Yeah, we actually looked at that too. We did like a case study on what the different like password managers did, and the ones that we looked at was the original HashiCorp Vault, which is what the T Vault was based on. We looked at AWS and we looked at LastPass, but we only looked at it from very much an experience point of view. So we looked at it from like, how are developers using this in their natural state? How are they like, how fast do they want to use it and things like that, right? Because for example, LastPass is consumer facing, but HashiCorp and T Vault is very much like a technical user focused. And so they're not really spending a lot of time in there because, we want to preserve that time to write code, like not to actually spend it looking for the keys, right? And so we looked at LastPass for maybe the ease of use, but not so much from a technical point of view.
And did that pose as a designer, because I'm assuming that there was a lot of, with the kind of password management, there's a big thing about the developers working on the code shouldn't even be able to see the passwords. So there should be kind of a zero knowledge of customer passwords. Did that kind of level of complexity from a technical side, did that ever kind of become a challenge for you as a designer? Or did that impact you at all?
So yeah, so there's a slight variation there because LastPass, right, is for, let's say, people like you and me to save passwords for multiple services that we're using. Whereas T Vault is pretty much for people who are writing code and they need to get passwords for like the databases, right? So credentials for the databases. And so I don't think there's this so much so, because it's not like a consumer facing product, there isn't like that much like privacy and security concern, just because again, like these are all just like kind of being copied into code itself, right? And the other thing is also the users there are not really looking at the keys themselves, they're just going to copy them. So they don't stand to really gain anything from those keys as well, or like certificates. It's mostly to write code, and it's like within, like it's for software development basically, as opposed to LastPass, which is more like maintaining passwords for services or like login specifically.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now I was just wondering whether that was something that came up. But thanks very much for the presentation and the Q&A. Really appreciated it. So yeah, thanks once again.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the time.
Great.